Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Good evening.
A warm welcome to our director, Mr. Gaurish Chandavarkar, our principal, Mr. Vineet Mirkar, faculty, students, and most importantly, our esteemed speaker, Mrs. Seema Hardikar, to this IES-COA World Environment Day event. United Nations has launched this decade for ecological restoration on 5th June 2021, which is the World Environment Day. The objective is to encourage worldwide awareness and for countries to take active action in protecting the environment. The first World Environment Day was observed in 1974, giving a global platform for inspiring positive change in the environment and spread awareness. This year, Pakistan is the global host in collaboration with UN Environment Programme. The theme of 2021 is Reimagine, Recreate, Restore. According to United Nations, ecosystem restoration means preventing, halting, and reversing damage to the environment by healing it. Today's event shall focus on sensitizing us towards ecological restoration. Mrs. Seema Hardikar, our speaker, has completed her master's degree in horticulture from Mahatma Phule Krishi Vidyapith, Rahuri in year 2009. She has completed certificate course in basic field botany conducted by Agarkar Research Institute Pune in 2008, 1-year certificate course in botany of habitats conducted by Nisarga Sevak Pune in 2013. She has also completed certificate course in wildlife conservation by Wildlife Institute of India, Dehradun. She has completed 1-year diploma course in sustainable development of natural resources and nature conservation organized by Ecological Society Pune this year. Currently, she is pursuing Geoff Lawton online permaculture design course conducted by Permaculture Research Institute, Australia. She is working as an ecological consultant for several projects, including 20-acre eco-resort project at Shahapur, Godrej Properties Limited for biodiversity survey of Vikhroli campus, a 2,000-acre private land at Temburli, Shahapur, along with developing food forest and sustainable farming species practices. She has founded a nature and environment education organization in Thane in January 2015, which is by name FERN, full form, short form for Foundation for Educational Rendezvous with Nature. FERN organizes short duration classroom and field-based courses in field botany, basic ornithology, and it also conducts workshops on butterfly garden, vegetable garden, home hill garden, etc. Apart from this, she has also participated as a visiting faculty at Bhavans College, Andheri for Biodiversity and Wildlife Conservation and Management program in the master's course. She is member of the National Academic Committee for National Children's Science Congress, Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. She has also worked on documentation of 11 sites in Ratnagiri districts to be proposed as biodiversity heritage sites for State Biodiversity Board. She is co-author of the book by name The Other Mahabaleshwar, a project by Dhruti Vaidya Design Studio, which was published in 2018. She has also translated a bilingual book by name Panvel Great City Fading Heritage, which is in Marathi. Apart from all her academic and professional endeavors, she also likes traveling, trekking, photography, field documentation, reading, and sketching. So thank you, Seema, for coming on board for this event.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rucha.
Thank you. I would request our respected director, Mr. Gaurish Chandavarkar to say a few words before we start with the presentation.
Good afternoon and good evening, everybody, and warm welcome to Seema. As I said earlier, she has been kind enough to take this event up for us, and it's actually a great pleasure to have you talking on environment. At IES, it's always been a constant endeavor to see that environment and sustainability play an important role in an architect's life, and it's always a thought that we take through all our exercises as and when the opportunity comes in. With a very strong landscape department and the head of the institute, Vineet Mirkar, being an environmentalist himself, it adds that much more flavor and importance in our pedagogy of showing what architecture is all about. So, Seema, your participation will be of great value, and I'm sure your experience will bring great value to our students who are listening to you and to your presentation today. World Environment Day, World Environment Month is not only for a day or only for a month. I'm sure it should be taken up 365 days because primarily it is going to have an impact on everybody's lives. And more so with the students who are young, who are walking into architecture, crossing over the threshold. It's important for them also to know what this will be and how responsible their action would be as far as environment and sustainability goes. So without much more of my words, and I'm sure everybody is wanting to know what you have to say, I will request Rucha to go ahead with this event. Thank you again, and we welcome you at IES.
Thank you, sir.
So, Rucha, shall I share my screen?
Rucha, you are on a mute.
Yes, please. Sorry.
Is the screen visible, Rucha?
Yes, it is.
Yes, now it is now.
Yes.
It is visible.
Yes, it is visible.
Is
You
it
have to go
full
on a
screen
PPT
now?
mode.
Yes, it is full screen.
Yeah, okay. Let me just check if this, if I can, okay, fine. Okay, hello everyone and very good evening. So we'll, as Rucha has nicely described, the UN decade of restoration of ecosystems. So we are looking forward, as Vinit sir also mentioned, that we are looking forward for a decade and not just a day or an year, basically. So, so what is this all about, restoring our ecosystems around us? So what do we understand by restoration of ecosystem? Okay, so let us just run through what is that we want to restore. So that is the very first question that arrives in my mind, ki, what to restore. How would I know what to restore and what to leave it just as it is? Okay, so for this, basically you need to understand the concept of ecosystem, the concept of habitat, the concept of succession, which is a part of which is the vital part of ecology. So you might be knowing or might have heard the term succession, wherein it's an ongoing ecological process. It is very complex and integral process, which is ongoing and which is continuous, like evolution, and which actually takes a patch of land or maybe an ecosystem or a habitat from a point to a certain point in time, and what does it achieve is basically it tries to go till the climax system, climax ecosystem, or climax vegetation, we can say. So we need to understand that this concept key, what will be the climax ecosystem in a particular patch or particular ecosystem that we are visiting or we are looking at or we are seeing. So we need to understand and what you can say, and develop an eye to uh, to derive certain what you can say observations and conclusions when we visit a particular site or maybe an ecosystem. So we need to look for certain patches of original vegetation, maybe then certain patches which are degraded, maybe. So what is degradation? Degradation is basically due to either natural or most of the time human intervention, anthropological intervention. The system which is totally natural or primary ecosystem, it degrades. That means it takes another shape or form in which the original vegetation is replaced by some other secondary vegetation, or certain elements get replaced. And as we all know that an ecosystem consists of basically the non-living things, and in living things there is the vegetation, which is very primary or basis of life, and on which the entire faunal ecosystem is dependent on. Okay, so this faunal, if the vegetation changes, the faunal associations also change. The birds, the insects, and the other fauna associated with that particular vegetation is suddenly gone, and it is replaced by the other species, which we in ecological term we call them generalist species. So whenever you visit any natural ecosystem or a primary forest, all the faunal species that you find there, most of them are the specialist species. So we need to develop this understanding and eye to identify these species, both floral as well as faunal, so that we may have an idea or evaluation or a judgment as to what stage of succession the particular ecosystem is in. Okay, so the stages of succession are called as seral stages, as you can see over here. Seral stages are the stages of succession through which an ecosystem or a patch or a site or a habitat goes through till it reaches the climax vegetation. Okay, so most of the time, if you so let us just classify the basic ecosystems which we may find around us, maybe in and around Mumbai or Thane or in Maharashtra. So uh, as we belong to if we classify as per the climate thing, we belong to monsoon tropics, wet dry tropics or monsoon tropics. And the climax ecosystem in most of the areas in our climate zone is basically a forest. But this forest is not uniform. There are many types of forest which have been classified as per the composition of the forest, and the species, the dominant species and their associations which belong to a particular patch of forest. Okay, so we need to understand that as well. So though the climax ecosystem is most of the time it is forest, which kind of forest, that we need to understand. So most of the time it is what I have observed while working with maybe my clients or architects, is that we have an idea of forest in our mind as lush green and throughout the year, and with a lot of moisture and a typical rainforest like thing. But unfortunately, if we are working at a site where such kind of climate is not prevalent, then the forest that the climax forest that we can achieve to or work towards is basically a deciduous forest, and that is where we belong to. The forests around Mumbai, if you have been to any, I mean, RA or maybe Sanjay Gandhi National Park, or even Elephanta Island. So the dominant forest type in and around Mumbai is basically a deciduous one. Maybe moist deciduous somewhere, maybe dry deciduous somewhere, but that is deciduous forest, and it won't be lush green throughout the year. So we need to develop this understanding to what is the forest typology that at a site we are working on. Then there are other ecosystems around us. Majority of them are wetlands, and we have a very poor or little understanding of wetlands when like from ecological point of view. Most of the time we look at wetlands from only from the aesthetic or recreational point of view, and we forget what are the actually the functions of wetlands in terms of ecological cycles, maybe natural cycles, nutrient cycles, water cycles. So we most of the time we ignore them or fail to understand them, and then what we intervene or try to beautify our wetlands that has very adverse effects on a particular wetland as an ecosystem. So we need to develop an understanding towards wetlands as ecosystems as well. Then there are very specialist habitats or ecosystems called as rocky outcrops. You must have heard about Khas Plateau. So Khas Plateau is a vast plateau with mainly it is rocky, and it is famous for the monsoon herbs or flowering herbs, and the entire plateau is covered with. If you happen to visit Khas in maybe August, September, late August or September, the entire plateau is covered with flowering herbs, nice colors. But that is a rocky plateau, rock outcrop, one of the rock outcrops. Then as we are very close to Sahyadris, we have cliffs, we have mountain edges. So all these are specialized habitats which have their own like vegetation and floral and faunal associations. So we need to understand them as well. We don't have actually true grasslands, but a few savanna like thing are there in Indian subcontinent. So savannas are basically large patches of grasses which with interspersed. Yes, Rucha?
Are you changing the slide?
No, not yet.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So savannas are basically large patches of grasses which interspersed interspersed clusters of shrubs and few thorny trees maybe. So such kind of ecosystems we do have, like savanna grassland. So we need to understand which ecosystem are we like working on before going ahead. Then so for the second question here is what to restore to, like what are we looking at, where are we going, so what is the ultimate stage of succession in a particular site that we are working on. So that for that we need to visit and study some of the reference sites. So in reference sites, most of them, unfortunately, nowadays they only belong to where the protected areas are. Protected areas are basically national parks and wildlife sanctuaries, which you can visit, you can study and develop an understanding of flora and fauna over there. And of course, there are certain patches where still the sacred groves are retained by a village community, and which have a small climax ecosystem patches. So those also we can study as a reference site for understanding what to restore. And the last point over here is mosaic of habitat. So I'm going to show you one picture of the entire landscape, and we will be looking at it with basically an eye to observe different habitats. So let us move on to a few landscape pictures. Rucha, I'm not able to change the slide.
Okay. Uh, can you scroll the? Can you press the
Yeah.
over arrow button on your keyboard?
Is it?
Yeah. Yes, it's visible.
Yeah.
It's
Fine. Okay, so let us. So this is a general picture of any a landscape, rural landscape. So this is near. This is the base village of Pansad from coastal side or Alibag side in Roha Taluka. So so this is if you just have a look at this kind of landscape, it is always a mixture or mosaic of different habitats. And these habitats, there might be a few natural habitats or natural ecosystems, then a few cultivated ecosystems, then there will be few settlements. So if you have a look at the hills here, most of the hilltops are basically vegetated. There is a natural forest over there because these are the most of the time these are the reserve forests. So the of course the hilltops and the valleys, what we have observed, the hill slopes, the upper slopes we can say, are all vegetated as they belong to basically the reserve forest. So this patch is most of the time it is natural vegetation. So let us go further. Then basically we have a settlement over here, a small hamlet or a village over here. And as you can see, this entire patch is basically cultivated patch. So it is maybe there are coconut groves, coconut orchards, then some fruit orchards or something. Then this entire belt is basically paddy cultivation. As it is low lying, it is a paddy cultivation. And this is again, this side is again the forest. Okay, so it is always a mosaic of habitats and mixture of man-made as well as natural habitats. So what we need to understand from here is the particular site or point that we are working on, it belongs to which kind of habitat over here. Is it cultivated, or is it a part of settlement, or the near reserve forest, or agro, or something like that. So we need to understand this, and then we can study a few natural habitats from this particular landscape as our reference site. So yeah. Okay. So this is another nice landscape. This is basically Nashik side, Igatpuri, between Igatpuri and Nashik. This particular site is basically Kaunai slopes. It is called as Kaunai slopes. Kaunai is the hill range over here. And as you know, this area is famous for cultivation of grapes. So if you can see over here, this is a vineyard. So as we were talking, so it is again a mosaic of different habitats. So you have a vineyard over here, then a small garden patch in here, then a small grassland patch over here, then the age of the water age over here, which is again very productive kind of habitat. Then the backwater, then the hills, and other things. So it is again a mosaic that we were talking about. Let us go to another. This is we can say a semi-urban thing, and this is the purely the urban landscape. This is Parsik Hill. This is somewhere near Nerul, and this is a lotus lake. So I have been studying wetlands since now quite a few years now, and we have been studying wetlands in Thane district for there was a PIL in High Court for which we initiated that study. What we understood through that study is basically if you look at the ages of wetland, let me just okay. So this particular is the age of the wetland. This entire is the age of the wetland, or this side also where I am standing is the age of the wetland. If these ages are left natural, it is a confluence of two different ecosystem or two different habitats. So it is water and land. It is a confluence between that, and as it is an age, the ages are always productive, more productive. So they have a lot of diversity of flora as well as fauna. So from wetland point of view, if we are going for restoration of any wetlands, then this particular thing is very important, which is in urban scenario mostly it is highly neglected and not worked upon. And what we basically have an idea of wetland or a lake or a pond is basically it will always have a concrete retaining wall and the stone pitching and the pathway and something like that. So we don't we haven't kept the ages of the wetland natural. We have concretized them, and that is creating a lot of problems because most of the biodiversity is supported on these ages of any of the wetlands. So so we need to understand that as well whenever we are intervening in any of the wetlands, or maybe a lakeside or a pool or a pond side or whatever. Then yeah, so the basic idea behind restoration is why are we doing this? Why are we talking about this? What is the use of understanding all these habitats and ecosystems and the succession and the serial stages, and what are we going to get out of it if at all we try to restore an ecosystem to its climax stage? So a very important aspect that we need to understand here is basically the term ecosystem services. So yeah, okay. So ecosystem services, there are there is this classic classification of ecosystem services: regulatory, supporting, cultural, and provisioning services. So in provisioning services, it comes basically all the entire your food, then fiber, then fuel wood, then maybe timber, and then the medicinal plants and everything that we obtain from any of the ecosystem. As we were discussing, the climax ecosystem in most of the area surrounding us is basically a forest ecosystem. So most of these things that we obtain from forest is a service that we are getting from forest for free. Then then there are like regulatory regulating services, then there are supporting services, then the cultural services. So let us understand this from landscape perspective. If we go back to the rural landscape over here, why these villagers need to retain forest on this hilltop or on extreme slopes is basically the entire water cycle, nutrient cycle for their paddy fields. So where are these paddy fields getting water from? Obviously this particular watershed, right? So basically their nutrient cycle is dependent on the vegetation or kind of intervention which is happening in this particular patch. So yeah, so they might be obtaining their fuel wood, their timber, then a few of the forest food species and medicines from the vegetation which is retained on the hilltop or the extreme the upper slopes of the hill. So that is why restoring these hills or keeping these hills with a good natural vegetation is very important from this village point of view, or a hamlet point of view, or a settlement point of view. So similarly, if we go to an urban habitat that we okay, so someone can say ki we are not dependent on forest for maybe food or shelter or fuel wood or timber maybe. Yeah, that is true. We are not directly dependent on the surrounding forest. I don't obtain my food from Yaur Hills or timber or fuel wood from the Yaur Hills for cooking. But indirectly, what we do basically. So let us go to an urban scenario. So this is Navi Mumbai. So this is basically the Parsik Hill. And if this is a wetland which is just below the Parsec Hill, just at the base of the Parsec Hill, it is feeding, the Parsec Hill is feeding this particular wetland, and it might be connected from here to the creek, basically. So it is an important or major part of your watershed. It is storing your extra water during the rainy season. Maybe so it is basically, it is why this is important for us is basically from what you can say, climate safety, from the point of view of climate safety, or flood control, or nutrient cycles, or retention of the nutrients and minerals. So from that point of view, it is serving us as the ecosystem service, one of the ecosystem services. So it is, it may not be basically provisional services every time, but there are other kinds of ecosystem services that we need to understand. And then of course the health and nutrition and climate safety, as we talked, then food security, mostly for the rural landscapes, livelihood security. Most of the rural livelihoods are mainly dependent on the surrounding habitats. If they are kept intact, their the grazing lands, then the common woodlands of the village, maybe, then the hilltops, as we looked at, the upper slopes, all, and the streams, the natural the waterways, if they are kept intact and as natural as possible, so it offers a nice livelihood security and food security, as well as health security. And that is how we aim for sustainable development of any of the landscapes. Then yeah, then let us start with the process of firstly the background study, what we need to do before we start actually the restoration process. So whenever I am working with a particular site for restoration, so while talking to Rucha, I wanted to be very clear over here with you that it is very difficult to get pure restoration projects. So the awareness, though it is basically growing, nobody is most of the time your client or anyone who is offering you some project, it will be always a mix kind of project, some productive landscape and some ecological restoration thing. So don't think that you as architects will be never be going to work on ecological restoration. It is not like that. So whatever site you are working on, or wherever whatever ecosystem you are working on, there is always chance to follow this kind of the process, or go with this kind of mindset to observe and study things, and then do whatever intervention you are planning to. So yeah, so we should be having a fair understanding of where we are working, the location, the geographical location, and the geology and hydrology, the surface hydrology, then the groundwater, then the subsurface storage, of course the climate, altitude, maybe. So we need to have a fair understanding where we are working, what we are working with. Then of course, as we said, the study, you should always go for a study of reference sites. So what is the climax vegetation of this particular area, which I should be looking forward to achieve, basically. For that, you may need you will have to study the reference ecosystem or a reference site, a reserve forest or a protected area, maybe, as well as you should be to have a fair understanding of what is the current stage of the site that you are working on. You need to have a thorough biodiversity survey of that particular site. So understanding of what kind of vegetation is there, what kind of habitats are there, some micro habitats maybe, then associations between the flora and fauna. So all this you need to record, you need to understand, you need to relate to. And then we can go ahead. Agrobiodiversity is also basically something which is to be looked upon. because many a times the site you are working on might have some patches of cultivation, and again those fields or maybe paddy fields, they retain a lot of biodiversity. So that also should be the part of your study. Then what is the existing land use of that particular site? So before you start working on the site, so what is that site like used for? So for the last few thing maybe, or annually, what does so how the people or local people or community uses that particular site? There might be a wetland which is common and which is used by maybe domestic cattle or domestic animals or maybe wild animals. There can be a corridor of any of the wild animals through your site. So then there might be some heronries, like nesting birds nesting sites in on your site. So migratory birds might visit your site during the season, maybe winter. So that all these things you need to keep in mind before initiating any of the interventions. And the most important point over here is basically the threats. So if you understand through your study that a particular site is degraded, and it is not in its original form, and we need to restore it, then what are the threats because of which it is degraded? So most of the time what you will find is basically it is because of over harvesting of resources. And before you intervene, you should be able to stop these three things. So that is no cutting, no more cutting. Then resist or what you can say, stop the fire. And third is stop grazing, because most of the time due to overgrazing, the primary vegetation degrades to a secondary form. So grazing, cutting, and fire are the three major threats in any of the rural landscapes. And of course, we need to study community associations as well. So most sometimes your site or in a surrounding area, it might be inhabited by a few tribal communities maybe, or some local communities which have been using your site for their needs maybe, or their services. So you need to understand their association with the area. That is utmost important, because ultimately they are going to live there for a long time, and not us. We'll be intervening for a shorter period of time. Yeah. So let us start with a process. Rucha, do I have 20 more minutes?
Yes, Seema.
Yeah. Okay. I will try to finish in time. So that, yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So
Sure. No
yeah.
problem.
So let us start with a process. What are we going to do exactly? So what are we like? What are the points of intervention? So very first thing is protection. So give the complete protection to whatever area or whatever site you are working on. So for that we need a fencing. The fencing can be, if the site is small, it can be a dry fence, which is a temporary thing. You can, for a long term, it is the live fencing always helps. So we can go for live fencing, but it takes time to establish. So till then we may have a wire fencing or something like that. So but fencing is utmost important to stop the basically the wild animals or domestic animals, and to avoid grazing and cutting, and of course the fire. Your fencing may not work against fire, but for fire you will have to take some other measures. I will show you what we have done. Then of course comes the earthwork. So earthwork is basically is needed for soil and water conservation measures mainly. So most of the time in degraded ecosystem, what you would observe is there is no topsoil. The topsoil is lost. And the soil is literally barren. It is devoid of organic matter, organic content, and any of the microbial activity. So it might support only in monsoon season, it might support a few, the grasses will grow maybe, and unpalatable, that too unpalatable grasses, and a few monsoon herbs, that's it. And then for the entire year, you will find nothing on that particular soil. So such soils mostly, the soil is so degraded that the topsoil layer is lost due to heavy erosion. So we need to work on that. So for that, we need to also for basically increase the percolation of water in our land and stop erosion. We need to work on some watershed management techniques as well, mainly for erosion control and restoring the topsoil, as well as water content and water availability in soil, so that it will naturally start supporting the vegetation. So most of the time, what general people are interested in is basically just go and plant trees. So what happens is, if your soil is not ready for to support the growth of trees, it might be like, it might be a failed effort. So just planting trees is not something which is the first step in restoration. So it of course, you might need to plant trees if to support or to accelerate the process of succession. But before that, your soil should be ready with some organic matter, some organic content, with good microbial activity, and retaining moisture, and maybe mulching. So with which will help, and of course the erosion control measures simultaneously, which will help the growth of plants. So we need to work on that first before initiating any plantation programs or any planting activity. And whenever we are basically going for planting or plantation, always prefer to have native species or native vegetation. You can make a list of species by just observing your surroundings, and whichever are the natural habitats in your surrounding, they will be supporting some species in that particular climate or geology and that particular scenario, and which are best adapted to that ecosystem. And you will also need to study some pioneering species which are very hardy, so that you can go for plantation of pioneering or hardy species first, and then they will create what you can say, the enough soil and water availability, and the organic matter content, so that the specialist species can grow. So don't directly go for just planting of any of the species because you like them or your client likes it, but try to develop this understanding, which are the species which are native to this particular area, adapted to the particular area, and which are hardy to start with. And then a very important point is basically creating different habitats. So although you have a very small site, also a very small area to work on, you can create very small micro habitats. You can create a small pond, which may have a few aquatic plants, maybe a few floating plants, then a few plants surrounding the pond in the mud maybe. Then it will be visited by honeybees, it will be visited by a few birds for bathing or drinking of water, so something like that. Then you may have a small patch of maybe herb spiral or a stone arrangement, so that it will be visited by a few reptiles. Maybe they can have a hiding place or a feeding place over there. So like that, you can create a small habitat, small habitats. Try to create as many ages as possible. Age of your your fencing. If you are going for live fencing, your live fencing will always create an age, and that age effect will boost up the biodiversity. So like that, you can create basically try to create as many habitats as possible. uh, yeah. So let us, in 10 more minutes, I will just brief you about one of our projects which is going on. So that it is just the initial stage, and we are, yes, we are working. I will just share the process of how we started with the restoration process over here. So if you can see, the location is basically in Shahpur, near in Thane district. So in Shahpur, there is a village called Dorkham. So near Dorkham, this is a site. This the name of the site is Temburli, and the village is Temburli basically, and it is just parallel to the Western Ghats. So this is the west, and the Western Ghats are here. And if you are aware, in Shahpur there is another range, mountain range, that is Mahuli. So we have Mahuli on east, Mahuli on west, and we have Western Ghats on east. And this is basically a ridge, and which runs parallel to the just to the Western Ghat, but in Konkan the altitude is less. And then we are dealing with almost 200 acres over here, this particular site. As you can see over here, yeah. So so there is a ridge, there is a plateau, and then there are valleys. So we have a first valley going down from here, then this is second smaller valley, then this is a large and very wide valley going down, then this is the fourth valley. So we have a plateau and valleys as well. As you can see, the plateau is mostly devoid of any kind of vegetation. It is almost barren. You can see a few planting lines. This is an old teak plantation in this particular area. But if you observe this particular area in valleys, it is all natural vegetation. So what happens is, whenever we start working on this particular site, these valley, they become our reference sites. So what actually can grow here? So what this system can support, which kind of vegetation it can support, so what are the species it can support, what are the species, what are the floral species as well as faunal species which are already there, which are already in existence at this particular site. Then we have a small pond over here. Then we have again a seasonal, what you can say, a percolation tank over here. Then another percolation tank over here. So these are a few water bodies that we already have on our site. And of course the teak plantation, the entire teak plantation area over here. Then something over here, and then somewhat over here. So so let us just go through a few pictures in which you can get an idea what interventions actually we tried to do on this particular site. Yeah, so as I was talking, so these are a few habitats that we already have, like we identified on that particular site. So this is this is that percolation tank which retains water only till the October, because it is not built for the retaining water. It just the water just percolates. Then this is a small pond, a natural pond which retains water till summer, and the local community as well as domestic as well as wild animals, they are dependent on this particular pond for drinking water. So that is very vital for the locals as well as the wildlife as well as domestic animals. So that we need to keep in mind before before having any intervention at that particular site. Then we have a few seasonal ponds like the third picture. So these are a few water habitats, then aquatic habitats, then these are the other kind of habitats. So we have shrubby clusters like this. So the entire plateau is like this in monsoon, all grassy, grassland-like, and we have small shrubby clusters, small clusters of stunted trees, a few tree clusters, a few shrub clusters. Yes, and mostly this grassy, big grassy patches. So that is how the plateau looks in monsoon season. It's beautiful though. Then, of course, so we have a few patches of, sorry, yes, we have a few patches of deciduous forest. Then this is the teak plantation area. So what we did was we identified these different habitats first, and then yeah, we have these four or five of these old growth trees. So please keep in mind, do mark on your any of your site plans, or if you have such kind of tree, an old growth tree, you may have mango, you may have mahua, you may have banyan, whichever old, you may have hirda or behda, whichever old growth tree you have on your site, however small it is or large it is, please try to preserve that. That is our heritage. Basically, that's a specimen tree, and we need to preserve these trees, because this might be a few decade or few 100 years old. We don't know who planted them, but they in itself, they are basically a small micro habitat, and which support a lot of species. So we need to have a look for an eye for them. Yeah, then in valleys, we have mountain slopes, then the streams running through the valleys. Then we have, yeah, so like this. Then we have these small waterfalls over here. So we have diversity of habitats, and as we have a lot of habitats already existing on that site, it supports a lot of diversity already, in natural way. Then, if you remember, I had mentioned some generalist species and some specialist species. So while we are studying or listing down the or making checklists of flora and fauna during our surveys, we found basically there are a few species which are kind of specialist species. So you might be knowing the silk cotton, red silk cotton. So this is another species of silk cotton. Our regular silk cotton is basically Bombyx ceiba. This is Bombyx insigne. We call that Kate sour. We call this Dev sour. So this Dev sour, there are a few plants or trees of Dev sour at our site, and that is something which excites me very much, because that's a specialist species. Our site is in good condition. Then this is one of the species of Hymenodictyon. This is again a specialist species. This is a beautiful ground orchid species, Habenaria camelinifolia. So that is what we found in one of the valleys, and we have a good population of this particular Habenaria species, and of course we need to conserve that particular patch and avoid any interventions in that particular patch. So like that, you might have an understanding of what is actually there on your site. Then about fauna, we have, of course, we have a lot of reptiles. As you can see over here, there was a structure and there is a snake. Yes, we do have herbivores, wild herbivores like nilgais. So this is the nilgai droppings. Then occasionally our site is visited by leopard. So that is also something very exciting for us, because the site is a leopard's corridor. Occasionally it visits once or twice a year. So that is something we need to remember or keep an eye for. Yeah, so this is I was talking about the nearest habitation or settlement from our site is a tribal community hamlet, and the community over here is Thakar Adivasi. So they have their own culture and traditions, and they have been using and not using, but they have been living here since like generations. So they have very deep understanding of all the elements in on this particular at this particular site. So we it is very nice and insightful to interact with them, to roam around with them on this particular site. So try to understand how they perceive this land, the different habitats, then plants and animals and birds and everything. So yeah, this is this is an interesting site. They have their, as their Adivasis, the natural instinct is of hunting, and they have a few tools or equipment or what we can say for hunting as well, and they are hunters. Yes. Then this is regarding agrobiodiversity. As there is, the topsoil is very less, it supports very hardy species like sesamum, or one more oil seed that is karado, in local people call it khurasni, and then a few millets like varai and nagli. So that is about the agrobiodiversity over that particular plateau. And of course, as we were talking about the threats, yes, the threat of the fires is quite large, as it is a vast expanse. The plateau is vast, so the fire is a major threat. Then the grazing, and of course the cutting for fuel wood and timber. So that is something we needed to have check on. So quickly, just in 5 minutes, I will just wind up. So quickly about our intervention, what we did. So this was the background of the site, the 200-acre site. So what we did was, a 200-acre is not a small land to have fence. So what we did was, we basically dug a 1 meter wide trench, all throughout the boundary, and then 1 meter wide this one. So this particular trench ka soil got over here. So we did that. So at least there is a 2 meter wide barrier for to cross for the basically wild animals as well as domestic animals as well as any of the trespassers. So that is what we did for the entire 200-acre land, the boundary. And of course, the trench is not continuous. As you can see, it has the side the things, a small bund like thing, so that the water is retained. So it is serving both purposes, water retention as well as the boundary marking. So that is how we marked the boundary, or for fencing we did this. Then on the bund, we planted a few hardy and thorny plants. Of course, they are going to take time to establish, maybe 3 to 4 years, but we planted agave. Then this is agave. We planted a few thorny plants like sagargota and other climbers. And so they are going to take time to establish the live fencing. But yes, we are going for live fencing. Then this is a Google image. I don't know if you can see over here. Yeah, so let me zoom in on this patch. So what we did is, we did contour bunding. So we actually marked half contour lines with half-meter intervals, and we actually made bunds on these contour lines. This is one of the watershed management techniques that we are following here, making contour bunds, and of course the trenches. That is another technique. So for the entire land, we have done this contour bunding. Then whatever the pond was there, we are just digging it and making it trying to increase the storage capacity of the particular pond, so that to increase the water availability, we are building another farm pond to water whatever the plantation or we will be initiating in next few years to support the plants, of course. Then yeah, So if the site is small, you can just go for a barbed wire fencing, and directly, if the soil is good and it is having organic matter, you can directly go with pits and planting in the first season. This is one of the riparian zones that is on one of our sites, and we are planting riparian vegetation, so riverine vegetation along that. So like this also, you can make a few bunds and stone bunds, and create a few planting system, so that your topsoil is retained, soil moisture is retained, and you can go for maybe planting or farming or whatever. So these are the planting systems that we prepared on our. This is a small pond over here. So yeah, these are the few systems that were designed before planting. Then grass is a major resource as well, because it provides a lot of biomass as well as mulch. But basically, it is a kind of threat also, because in dry season it can catch fire, and the fire can just spread, because there is very less green vegetation over here, and it is a threat. So you need to so there are many methods to um, to arrest that particular threat. So one of the proven methods is manual cutting of grass, and you just lay that in heaps, make heaps, and lay the cut grass, so that it will slowly decompose, and you get a nice what you can say a compost, or you can give it back to soil. The another method, as we are dealing with a huge area, and manual cutting of grass is highly expensive and time consuming. So what we did is, basically we just scrape the land a little bit with either the JCB loader or the JCB bucket. So that you can do, and with little scraping, that grass ka growth you can arrest. So that is another method that we have tried, as the area is very large. Then yeah, this is again a difference. I know I will be finishing in 2 more minutes. Okay, so this is another thing I wanted to show over here. So if you look at this side of the pathway, here the grass is retained. The last year's grass is retained. This is the latest picture once the monsoon has started. Wherever you retain the grass, last year's grass, the new grass growth is somewhat what you can say postponed or arrested, and the grass patch decreases. Whenever you this area actually did catch fire last year, and it is devoid of any of the grass layer, dry grass layer. So with just a few showers, maybe just hay, it is all green now with a new hay. So in most of our areas, there is a traditional practice of burning. People burn with they might have some logic, I don't know, but it is not a good practice, because they burn with an intention of maybe reducing the grass or whatever grass patch. But you need to remember, the studies show that whenever you burn a grass, you are going to increase the patch of the grass for the next year. So burning the grass is not ecologically correct option of getting rid of the grass or the dry grass, whatever. So that is how, yes, then this is how we studied the reference ecosystems for Shahapur. So this is the protected area, the base forest at Aja Parvat. This is one of the sacred groves in Shahapur near Shenwa. Then yeah, so this is how we study the reference ecosystem. This is whenever you are going for planting or vegetating your site, so while you are surveying your reference hey, please do go for seed collection, because most of the species which are native to the area won't be available in commercial nurseries. So that is how so that is what you need to establish your own nursery, then your own seed collection drives, and make your own seedlings and saplings for plantation. So that is what we generally recommend. and you might go for collecting seeds, then some planting material of local yams and everything, or some cuttings of a few climbers or trees maybe. So that is how you can go for vegetating, trying to vegetate or your area or site. So of course, so this is the last slide, I guess. So so the restoration, as Vinit sir was saying, is a long process, and it may involve a few decades maybe. So we are at least planning to work on this Shahpur project for next 10 years. So we have a plan for 10 years, but it is very short in ecological or geological time scale. So but that is how it is. If you want to intervene or accelerate the process of succession, then yeah, there are some ecologically sustainable ways in which we can do that. But you need to these are some practical aspects that you need to keep in mind, that your client might have some different idea about the site. Then there are, of course, the timeline constraints and the budget or funding constraints, then feasibility. Sometimes what happened, as I said, if your client is not aware of what might be the natural ecosystem over here, he might say, I want an evergreen forest over this particular patch, and it is not feasible, because your site doesn't belong to a climatic and geological region which can support an evergreen forest. So it should be realistic. What are you aiming for? Even in ecological restoration process, it should be realistic and feasible. So that is what you need to convince your client about. And of course, the process of succession to keep in mind. And you can always go for a combination of natural as well as the productive ecosystems. So that is what you can always try for or aim for. And thank you so much, all of you. I know I took, I guess, 8 or 9 minutes more, but I hope, as I told Rucha, this is a very short time to explain the process of ecological restoration, as it's a vast topic, and there are many aspects and angles to it. But I just introduced you to the concept, the process, and a few interventions or examples what we are doing on our sites. So if you want any further clarification or discussion, or if you have any queries, please write to me at cma@fund.in, or give me a call anytime. Please visit our website. This is a nice book by Dr. Prakash Gore of Ecological Society, The Restoration of Nature. If you happen to, or I would request Rucha and Vinit sir that please buy this copy from Ecological Society and put it in your college library. It would be of great help. And yeah, this is a video, Forests of Tomorrow by Ketaki and Manasi of Oikos, who are working in the field of ecological restoration for past almost 10-12 years. And you might watch that on Phone's YouTube channel as well, so to have a more understanding of what they are doing. Yep. Thank you so much. Rucha?
Thank you, Seema.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you see me? Thank you, Seema, for a very elaborate and informative lecture on ecosystem restoration. I'm sure students have taken notes which will be helpful for them in their study. This forum is actually open for questions and deliberation, discussions. So, anybody has any questions?
Please feel free to like shoot anything what comes to your mind, because I would have loved if it was an interactive session.
Sure. Seema, actually, I had something to ask you.
Okay.
In a site like this, does the Miyawaki system, I mean, first, I would request you to explain what is the Miyawaki method. And on a site like this, does that Miyawaki method work in restoration? And to what
Yeah,
extent?
yeah. So Miyawaki, Akira Miyawaki, what the kind of technique that he has developed is basically for a different, what you can say, a different purpose. So, so one of the purposes that he developed that particular system in Japan is basically to protect the coastal ecosystems. The post tsunami, whenever he studied the local vegetation which try to arrest the ingress of sea and basically sand into the inland land. So he found a few species which are basically are dominant in that area and which have deep rooted systems and which can act as barrier to arrest such kind of ingress. So so for that he developed that particular system so that those what you can say windbreaks or shelter belts could be developed through that particular system. Also in urban areas, if we have where we have constraint of land, we have a very short very smaller pieces of land maybe to work on. So there it can be followed because it involves planting of dense planting of saplings. But underline, so Miyawaki is Akira Miyawaki is an ecologist, and he always recommends using species which are native, which are hardy, and which have and basically in multiple layers, which is a characteristic of our forests. We have tall trees, then medium trees, small trees, then shrubs and climbers and undergrowth and everything. So that is how mimicking that the forest is recommended in Miyawaki. It is, of course, it is a good method. Why not? But on following that on a larger site might be very difficult. On a smaller site in urban scenario, it is quite good. So we are actually developing a small patch of Miyawaki forest in Godrej campus. So that is one of our projects, and we are really hoping to develop a good patch with all the natural the native species which are around, which dominate the forests around Mumbai.
Right. Any more questions? Students, faculty?
Hello, ma'am. This is Vaibhavi. I had one question. So, in case we are looking at a localized restoration project, uh, is there can that project change the situation of a watershed thing on a larger scale? Is it possible?
Uh, yeah, so it depends on your intervention, the scale of your intervention, of course. So watershed can be quite large, no? So basically, the scale or the point where you are making an intervention, maybe a few watershed major techniques, maybe. So that might change the of course. As I said, if you are making an intervention on a large scale, yes, so surface hydrology you can definitely like work upon. And but for subsurface thing, you need to have a better understanding of different watershed, because the for the groundwater or the subsurface water table, your recharge area might be in a different watershed. So that might also happen. So it is very complicated, and we won't have an idea of subsurface hydrology just by looking at a land and the surface hydrology. So those two are the different things. But yes, the surface hydrology you can definitely intervene for a better management of water and soil management.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Welcome. Any other question?
I guess the questions would start coming up once they assimilate lots of things. Because what happens that
Yeah.
we are talking about a large envelope. We have been trained to look in a very particular site-oriented kind of approach. I guess that is what is important. Also, this is an eye-opening situation for everybody. As a human being, as a interventionist, as what we say, we should be kind of sensitive and to be aware of the larger ecological footprints and what would be our responses, and towards the same is what is important for us to understand. It is also a learning lessons that we have to see as an architect, that as what I said, that we are more into very specificity of a project. I guess as an architect or as an environmentalist or as a good citizen of of this earth, I would say that you should start looking beyond our sites. And as what you have said, that it is important that you start observing what is happening around, start assimilating what is happening around, and see how less I can intervene, how my intervention is not going to affect somebody else. Because I guess, and that is how our the philosophy will come into place, that the whole earth is our kutum. So it's a Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So I guess that is the kind of thing, if you start following, I don't think so we need to go into a restoration projects anymore. That's what I would say to kind of sum up the whole thing. And so with that, I thank you to come and talk about ecological restorations, which is an important part for the students as well as the faculty, because I always say that it is not about the students. We normally talk about only the students to gain. I guess it's important for a teacher or any enabler. I would normally say that we are not a teacher anymore. We are just an enabler of kind of creating that platform for students to absorb. And along that, we also learn. So it is important for us to also learn, to kind of see the point of views, because it is important that I have my point of view because which I have gone through my education or my experiences. But if I start looking from the other perspective and point of view, I may able to change my premises of interventions or anything else related to that. So it is important to be looking at and listening to the people like you, so that we want to be sensitive, but in true sense, we will be sensitive if we start listening to it and observing. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Rucha, for arranging this talk for all of us. It was great that we started this rainy season with this ecological restoration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
you.
Seema. And we will definitely look forward to collaborating with you academically.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Guys, and thank you students also, who after the college also where we have taken their time out listening to it and then responding also in a small way, but I guess they will have their responses internally, and they will definitely have the queries, because as Gauri sir has told that we have a landscape department which is stronger in nature. We have almost 3 landscape architects who with us with very senior level to the kind of practicing level which we have. So I guess those questions would be definitely ponder our teachers over there, and definitely they will help out on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.